Good afternoon and welcome back to Debut Spotlight, the second one of the week, a rare and wonderful event. I am Ellen Comisar, your host, and I'm happy to be joined today by Tamar Shapiro, whose new book, Restitution, came out at the end of September and is a wonderful book dealing with the reunification of Germany after the fall of the wall, and that anniversary is actually coming up this weekend. So it seems like timing was meant to be. So welcome, Tamar.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Great. For those of you who are longtime members of Blaze Nation, welcome back. We are delighted to see you. For those of you who are new, welcome for the first time. We hope it won't be the last. The Mighty Blaze started in the onset of COVID, March 2020, and we are going strong now 5+ years later, and we have no intention of going away. It was begun by Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, two authors who know what it means to go on book tour and were very worried about their fellow authors whose book tours were suddenly canceled. So the Blaze was founded on a shoestring. We continue to run on a shoestring with an all-volunteer group of about 30 people, all creative professionals who have a love of books and writing. And we bring you shows every week for free. So if you like what you see, all we're going to ask is that you go buy books, and in particular, go buy Restitution. For those of you who don't know, we are all over social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and on Twitter, which we refuse to call X. We're having a little bit of an issue with our account. It was suspended, I think, because we were tweeting things they didn't like, but we're trying to work on that. But if you search for A Mighty Blaze, you will find our content is still getting posted. We also have a website, of course, www.amightyblaze.com. If you're there, you can sign up for our newsletter, which is a great way to stay current on our schedule. It will arrive every 2 weeks in your mailbox and have links to our shows, as well as information about our archive, which lives on YouTube. And you can go back and watch many, many wonderful interviews that have taken place across all different genres. So that's the plug. And now I would love to talk to you a little bit about Restitution, which has come out to with some wonderful praise. Abby Jenny has said that this is a book that will linger in your mind and asks important questions and resists easy answers. She calls it potent, moving, and assured. Elizabeth Gonzalez James says the book is tenderly and deeply wrought, and it's all about the ways that wars and political divisions can splinter countries and families, as well as fracture a person's spirit. It's an elegiac reminder of how our lives play out against the backdrop of the past and are shaped by forces that are larger than our own, says Susan Call, who is both an author and a former president of Penn Faulkner Foundation. It's deeply felt, beautifully crafted exploration of the ways a family can lose and find each other, says Claire Beam. And it goes on and on. Rich and immersive and intelligent, gorgeous, says Julia Phillips, who wrote Bear. And what else do I have here? You'll never believe this is a debut, says John Furcher, who wrote Devil is Fine. So these are some great comments, and I concur with all of them. It's a beautiful book. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And now you can sit back for a minute and we'll talk about you. And then we will jump, all that. Mm-hmm. So we will jump in after that with our questions. Tamar Shapiro has attended the Iowa Writers Workshop Summer Program and Breadloaf Writers Conference in Vermont. She's a candidate for an MFA and has previously worked as a real estate attorney and in the nonprofit sector. She was raised in the U.S. and Germany and currently lives in Washington with her husband, 2 dogs, and what she claims is 2 children. Let me say that right. I was getting ahead of myself. 2 children and the world's best dog, though my dog and some others might argue with that. She has written recently for Poets and Writers, Electric Literature, and Literary Hub. Her book, Restitution, was on a list from Town and Country of the 49 must-read books of fall 2025. And we're going to start with a little fact that I found amusing and lovely is that Tamar's first writing award came in second grade when she was named an author of merit in her hometown of Illinois. So you've been writing a long time, haven't you?
Yes and no. I mean, I think like a lot of kids, I had this dream of being a writer, and I was actually just recently back in my hometown. My family doesn't live there anymore, so I don't go back that often, but I was back and I ran into one of my high school teachers who told me something I'd never known, which is that she'd actually founded that contest in which I won that award, which is sort of a nice full circle moment. But I always I wrote short stories. I wrote some pretty terrible poems when I was very young. And then I stopped writing for a long time. I had a whole different career, which I loved. And it was actually, much more recently that I picked it up again and decided I wanted to try writing again.
What led to that shift? What led to that decision?
So it had always been on my mind. I mean, again, I think when I was a child, I think a lot of children have this dream of being a writer, and it sounds really glamorous, which sometimes it is, and often it isn't at all. And so I had that. But what really got me back in was actually just signing up for some short story classes at one of the local literary organizations here in DC, and realizing how much I'd missed it. And I hadn't really thought about that because I had actually loved what I was doing in my other career. But the minute I got started again, I sort of couldn't stop.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So given that your book has only been out about 5 weeks, my guess is that many of our viewers are joining just because they want to learn about a new book. Can you just give a very brief synopsis of what this book is about in terms of plot?
Absolutely. So Kate and Martin are brother and sister, and they're raised in Illinois by a German mother. Decades later, when the Berlin Wall falls down, they are faced with a question, which is, should they try to reclaim the house in East Germany that their grandparents fled from in the 1950s? And, needless to say, they don't agree. They have very different views for very different reasons about what should happen with this house. And of course, there are people living in the house and have been for decades at that point. And so the central conflict of the book is around this property dispute. But like many property disputes, it's not really about the property at all.
So it's interesting because your background was in real estate law, and
Yes.
a bit of the discussion when Martin and Kate go to Germany is they meet up with a lawyer who is helping families like theirs deal with property claims and trying to figure out what the law says and what their rights are and what the issues will be. Did your own background play into that, or did that at least help you on the research side of things?
Absolutely. So I think the first kernel of interest in this came from the fact that I not only was I doing housing and community development work, both as a lawyer and then in the nonprofit world in the US, but I spent a couple of years over in Germany, one of them in Berlin, and then a number in Leipzig, which is about an hour south of Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really focused on vacant properties in Germany, in former East Germany in particular, and sort of what you did with the fact that all these cities were shrinking and there was tons of vacancy and nobody quite knew what to do with the properties. And that got me thinking about property in former East Germany in general, and got me really focused on some of the decisions that were made during the reunification process that, to put it really simply, sort of took a whole lot of property that had been state controlled in East Germany, and for a variety of reasons, it ended up in the hands of largely West German developers. And there was sort of an inequity there that really started to both fascinate and frankly upset me. Okay. And that was sort of the kernel of this book.
Okay, great. Now our characters, Martin and Kate, are now adults in the contemporary part of this book. And this book does a wonderful job of bringing them back and forth in time, and also showing their grandparents' life before they were born, and them learning about their grandparents in a more contemporary setting when they meet up with people who knew them. Did you as a child go back and forth to Germany? I know your mother was German. Were you there as well as a child?
Yes, absolutely. And like them, so the book is not, I know we probably will get to this a little bit later. The book is actually not autobiographical, but some of the basic circumstances are very much like mine. So like my narrator, Kate, I grew up in Illinois and with a German mother, and I grew up spending my summers at a lake in southern Germany, which is called the Bodensee. So those things are actually, just like my narrator, but different is that my mother's family was entirely from West Germany. So my sort of entry point to East Germany came after the wall came down, when my parents, and I was out of the house by this point already. I was in college, or actually it was just after college. My parents moved to Leipzig in the early 1990s after the wall had come down. My father got a position there, and so I started visiting them all the time. Started once a year, became more frequent because I loved it so much. And I just fell in love with the city. And eventually I moved there myself with my husband and kids for a couple of years. And so it was that connection. It was me seeing the transformation of Leipzig as an East German city from the early 90s till now, which has been, it's an astonishing transformation over that time period. So yeah, my connections to Germany are very strong. It's like a second home to me.
Oh, that's good. Did you move? I know you did a lot of the writing, and you talk about finding the right cafes that had the great vibe for writing. Did you move primarily because you were working on this book, or were there other?
No, it was almost the other way around. We moved for family reasons, and then I sort of thought to myself, I could look for a job in Leipzig, or I could not try to look too hard for a job, and I could write instead, because I knew it was a temporary, period of time, and so I thought these 2 years I'm just going to take to just see if I can actually do this thing that I've wanted to do for a long time.
What a gift, a gift to yourself and a gift for your readers. If you're just joining us, we are talking about Restitution, which is the brand new first novel by Tamar Shapiro. So one of the things that I thought was interesting, and there's a lot of them, is one of the reasons that Martin and Kate go to Germany initially is that they have an aunt, their mother's sister, who is ill, and they've visited her over the years. They know her well, and she is ill. And their mother, Martin and Kate's mother, goes to Germany to be with her sister as she is dying, and tells Kate, I believe, she left without even one last look around when she's leaving her home, this is the home she had grown up in. And it struck me that what a parallel that was, or perhaps a metaphor for all the people who suddenly tried to go to the West. And so how that tied into the story. Did you see that in the same way? Was that just a coincidental little thing that stuck out in my head?
No, I don't think it was entirely coincidental. I mean, the book is sort of full of departures, right? I mean, the book is in many ways about loss, many kinds of loss, not just the loss of a home or a country, although that is, central, but there are also a lot of personal losses, like the loss of the sister who dies. But so I think it's definitely the case that I was trying to highlight the many different ways it sort of shapes that loss can take. And the reason that there's this sort of loss, because in that particular case, the aunt doesn't look around, not because she's not interested, but because she doesn't know it's going to be her last time in the house, which is a sort of a particular kind of tragedy in my view, that sort of departure or the farewell you wish you'd had, but you were never able to.
Right. And you have a lot of moments where Martin and Kate are going back to these homes that they visited as children and trying to remember what was there. They go to this house that has been now lived in by Klaus and Greta for quite some time, which they are now saying, well, it was my grandfather's house and we want it. And they're not necessarily being, they're not being explicit with that initially, but, they're going to visit the house they grew up in, basically. They summered in, and they were trying to remember where, was that always there? What, and so there is this whole connection about the house and what it means to people. And you talk at some point about it's just a house, just a place, that's all. But really it isn't or maybe it is to Martin and to Kate, but not Martin.
Yeah. Well, part of what it was, what I was sort of playing around with is and you reference this, there's two houses. There's two of the grandparents have two houses in
Right,
this
that's
book,
true.
basically. There's the one in the east that they fled at some point, and then there's the one in the west, which is the one that Kate and Martin in West Germany, Kate and Martin spend their summers at. And
Okay.
so one of the things that I was really interested in was, in the end, the conflict is about the house that neither of them have ever seen before. And what was sort of, there's a lot of books out there about family properties that hold meaning because of childhood memories. And there is that house in this book. It's the one in the West, but the one in the East is sort of like a blank slate to them. And because of that, they're able to fill it with whatever meaning they want to fill it with. And they fill it with very different meaning, the two siblings. And that was something that I thought was really interesting, that this place that they only know through the stories from their mother, who grew up there, obviously, and the aunt who grew up there, and to some extent the grandparents, takes on such oversized meaning, not because of the house. I mean, they've never seen the house until after the wall comes down and they visit it for the first time, but because of their relationship to the people who lived there at one point. And that was something I was really interested in exploring. And that's very different from the house in the West, which is full of their childhood memories. So that was an interesting parallel, I thought.
They also, there's also sort of the unknown. They only know so much about their grandparents.
Yeah.
And the family and their mother and Kate and Martin themselves all sort of, they have a tendency towards secrecy or withholding.
They sure do.
Is that a good way to say it?
You sure
There's
do.
A lot of, I don't talk to him about that. I never heard, why didn't you tell me those stories? Even at the end, multiple generations later, where you have a child who says, why did you never tell me this? So I found that really interesting. And I don't know if you thought that was a particular to these characters, particular to characters who lived in this divided country, or
I mean, I don't know that I could say it that broadly, but I do think that there's a moment in the book where the mother, so Kate and Martin's mother, who is in some ways, she's not an unloving mother. She's actually quite lovely with them, but she's closed off in a way. And there's a point in the book where they sort of put her on the spot and ask her why she never told him any of this stuff. And she tries to explain it. And her explanation is, that when they fled from East Germany to West Germany, the only thing the kids in the class wanted to do was sort of ask her about the East because they felt superior. So she didn't want to talk about that. So she learned not to talk about her past there. And then when she came to the US, the only thing anybody wanted to talk about was the war. And, she didn't want to talk about that. And so I do think, at least in her case, I was trying to build a character where it's not that she's just a secretive person out of nothing. It comes from her experiences, and it comes from the things that she has learned to keep to herself, either because people would interpret them the wrong way or because people were asking questions she didn't have answers to, but they expected them. And so I do think it came from that history, for her at least.
I want to congratulate you, Tamar, because you have attracted my longest distance viewer. We had somebody saying hello to us from Paris.
It might be my cousin who texted me ahead. Yep, that's my cousin. Hello.
See, and what's really interesting, is it George or
Georg?
Georg, you should know that backstage when we were talking and explaining how we put up these little banners on the show, that Tamar could ignore them. And my example was, of course, if like a cousin shows up and you see his name, you can do a shout out. Completely coincidental. So welcome from Paris. Bonjour, bonsoir. And I'm delighted to have you, but we will not conduct the rest of this interview in French.
No, please no.
That would be bad. So I'm going to just switch gears a little bit, because one of the things we talked about are the secrets, both within the family, and some of the secrecy happens, of course, between Martin and Kate, the siblings, who I loved their relationship, in part because I have siblings, some of whom I do really well with, some of whom not so well. And this so captured what it is to have an adult sibling where there are clashes. Can you talk a little bit to that? Do you have siblings? There was this purely?
I do. No, I have a brother and he
Christian?
is not Martin, and we actually have very few clashes. We do
That's
just
good to
fine.
hear. That's good to
And
hear.
he's read the book and he
Good.
liked it. So
He didn't
all good.
recognize himself in Martin.
No.
Good.
But I do find siblings fascinating because I think it's rare that there's another relationship like that where you have so many of the same experiences and yet those experiences can be interpreted so very differently. And that's true of Kate and Martin. They also have a few experiences that they don't share that are pretty formative, but they also share certain things. I mean, this is not a spoiler, for example, in the book, because it's clear right in the prologue, but their father leaves them when they're quite young. And they have extremely different reactions to that loss, even though they both go through it. It's their father for both of them. And so I find siblings to be very fascinating in that way. And I also think siblings were kind of a nice parallel for me for the countries, East and West Germany.
True.
So, in the same way that siblings can become estranged and then it's difficult to reconcile, it was not easy to bring the two Germanys together. Still not easy. So
that's a very interesting point. I love that. In fact, one of my favorite little sibling issue discussion of their time with their father. I'm going to indulge. Do you want to read it? Should I read it?
Whichever. I'm happy. Whatever you prefer.
Why don't you read it?
Okay.
Take a break. So this is a little scene where we're sort of getting a glimpse of the formative years of these children, Martin and Kate, when they're young, but sort of talking to their mothers, responding a little bit to them and sort of saying, they're trying to understand the clash and why they are the way they are now. So this happens about halfway through the book.
All right.
Okay.
That's typical sibling stuff, Mom always said when we were kids. Don't let it get to you. Or, it's not important, right, in the grand scheme of things. And even Dad, who left us so early, tried to teach us that our sibling bond was special. I can still see him, reclining in a garden chair in Illinois, wearing the thick plaid shirt he used for working in the yard. And I see the dirt on his jeans and on his hands and the rake next to him on the ground. A whole day outside with the wide Illinois sky above us and all the worms Martin and I needed to stay happy. We'd work for hours, and Mom would bring us glasses of lemonade, wrinkling her nose at the dirt, nodding at the newly planted flowers. When we were all done, Martin and I always argued about who'd found the longest worm, until Dad awarded the grand prize. Then we'd sit together on the patio, and Dad would say, "You two are lucky. You'll always remember each other's worms." Martin and I laughed each time, not sure why we should remember these or any other worms. But Dad, an only child himself, would say, "That's what siblings are for, the small things you share." Suddenly serious. And we'd squirm like the worms, drinking our lemonades, hiding our smirks behind our tall glasses.
I love that scene. It's so specific, it's so detailed, and so universal. There's always these tiny little things that you remember doing with your siblings, whether it's, digging things up, getting lost somewhere together, keeping, in this case, it's with a parent there watching them do something. And I just love the idea that they have a contest, for the longest worm. You're constantly, the rivalry was there from the start.
Yeah. It's interesting because I definitely have had people who've read it sort of divide into, Team Kate or Team Martin in a way. More frequently Team Kate, but
she's the narrator. She's
the narrator, so it's a little unfair. And there are definitely some Team Martin people out there as well. But I think for me, the most interesting thing was actually the moments where they were really close, because it's not an unclose relationship. It is a complicated one, and they are often deeply petty and childish, even as adults, because they've kind of taken their childish behaviors into adulthood. But it's not without tremendous closeness. And I think that was really important to me.
I remember once being home, I was in my 30s and visiting my parents, and my siblings were there, and my brother and I, over nothing, literally nothing, started going at each other. And my mom's like, are you 10 and 8 again?
Right. Well, that happens, right? When you go back home.
Yes, completely. And
Uh-huh.
and now that I have grown children who return home periodically, I fully understand
Mhm.
what we see and why we see it. Um, so there's a lot of interesting things that go on in this book and a lot of commonalities. One of the things that I noticed going on is that 3 of the women at different times find themselves counting. Krista, who is, how do I describe her? A family friend, Opa's close companion at some point. We have Kate's mother, Opa's daughter, and then we have Kate herself, where at different times, for sort of to catch their breath, they're counting. And it was almost like it was something genetic that had been passed through to them. Was that something you think about, is like those kinds of things that pass from family, from generation to generation, like sort of like, is it intangibly in the air?
I mean, so there's definitely a lot in this book that's about what is passed from generation to generation, both on the positive and on the negative side. And the other thing I would say is definitely very present in this book, and I'm not trying to make a general statement here, but in this particular family, the women are the ones, for the most part, who are sort of the survivors and more resilient. And the counting is, in a sense, maybe part of that, sort of staying on top of things, being able to find structure at a time when there's very little structure in life. You've just left your whole life behind. You're in a completely new place, but you find some way to go on and find structure. And the men in this particular book and in this particular family are the ones who struggle with that more. And that's definitely, so maybe that's sort of where that came from.
I sort of also saw it as like the women were able, the whole sort of count to 10, calm yourself down.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And they were able to breathe in deep, take in the situation and move forward. Whereas the men were more likely to be a little explosive, to have a very visceral and oftentimes sharp reaction to their circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, Kate's mother is maybe the prime example of this, because she sort of lives by the motto of, you got to move forward. You're just always moving forward. And Kate's actually not like that. Kate is actually a pretty analytical, backward-looking person, though not as much as her brother is, perhaps. There's still a distinction there.
Mm-hmm.
But for at least for her mother, I think that is that's sort of the thing that she has lived by, because it has carried her through all the different changes she's had to get through.
Right. And so much of the book is about this concept of letting go and moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, is a big part of the plot of what do we do with this house?
Yeah.
Do we let it go? How do we move forward from the spot we're in?
Yeah.
And also then reflects back on, how did Kate and Martin's mother move forward? Mm-hmm. How did Kate and Martin's grandparents move forward, which they did in different ways.
Right.
And with different degrees of comfort.
Yeah.
So I just thought that whole theme just keeps coming up and coming up. And, it's obviously very common in the human condition, this idea of, what do you carry forward with you?
And the flip side of that, which I think is really interesting, which is what do you hold on to and how?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's not just about what you let go, but there's certain things you want to hold on to, but how do you do that? And can you do that in a way that doesn't sort of get you stuck? So I think it's both of those questions.
Right. So there's a lot of history that gets woven in a very comfortable way. I'm not a huge fan of nonfiction history, unless it's happens to be a part of the world and time that I'm fascinated by. But did you do a lot of research? How much of this was things that you sort of knew, having grown up in a household with a German mother and going to Germany as a child? How much did you know? How much did you have to learn? And did you learn anything that really surprised you, in that it was different from what you had thought as a child or as a younger adult?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I did do a lot of research. I mean, so as a starting point, the sort of childhood scenes at the lake in Germany, in West Germany, I lived that, so I didn't have to do that much research on that sort of thing. But I had to do research. I also witnessed like I said, the immediate post-wall coming down years in Leipzig, and so I had some sense of that trajectory. But I obviously still had to do a lot of research. Examples are, I speak German, luckily. I had to read entire, legal treatises on property reclamation laws, which was not the high point of my research, but I needed to know. Most of that didn't make it into the book because most of that would be deathly dull in a novel. But I needed to know that the story as I'd constructed it could have happened that way or would have happened that way. And that was really important to me. I also spent a lot of time when we were living in Leipzig. This is the best part of the research was, we knew we made a lot of friends over there who had grown up in small towns around Leipzig, and they would invite us, back to meet their parents and aunts and uncles and former school teachers and neighbors. And those conversations, which usually happen with coffee and cake, which is a very German thing, those were the best part of the research. And those were immensely helpful, especially because the one part of this I didn't know at all, and which was entirely required research, from beginning to end, was the 1950s portion in East Germany. I mean, I didn't, I wasn't even alive at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, as a child, with spending my time in West Germany, I wasn't spending a lot of time thinking about East Germany. To me, as a child, West Germany was Germany, and I just didn't really think about it. And so I had to do all that research. And I think the thing that was most surprising to me was, in this country, I think we tend to think of the country split, the wall went up, and then wall came down, everything's glorious, which is an immensely simplified version of what happened. And the back end of that was already clear to me how sort of off that story was, because of course the wall coming down the reunification wasn't immediate. There had to be immense negotiations that took place over the course of a year before the two countries were reunified.
Sure.
And, a lot of not so great decisions were made during those negotiations, which happened very fast. But on the front side too, there was, a whole decade before, East Germany became a separate country in 1949 and the wall went up in 1961. And I knew very little about that time period. And I thought it was so fascinating because yes, the two countries were obviously separate. Yes, it was very dangerous to go back and forth, but it was still much more possible than it was after the wall.
Yes, that was interesting to me as well, that people were
going back and forth,
how to do it, how to skirt, how to navigate, where to go.
Yeah, there was sort of a looseness and a vagueness to that period that I found really fascinating and that I hadn't really known much about before.
Right. Well, as a compliment, I will say that the book Restitution wears its history lightly. It wears its research lightly. We've all read books where the paragraph shows up and it's all research and the author just said, I learned this and here it comes in and I'm going to give it to you because I don't want to keep it for myself. And this book does not do this. This book tells the history, which is both modern, but also far enough in the past for many of us. We're talking about Restitution with Tamar Shapiro. Talk a little bit about this cover while I'm holding it up. For those of you who can see, it has a picture of a woman, a picture of some houses and doors. Did you have any influence on this cover?
So, I mean, I think in most cases, the cover was not really within my control. The publisher does the cover, which is always a moment of fear, I think, for every author when you first get that file with, it's your cover and you open it up and you're just ready to panic. I mean, obviously, I had provided a lot of input. So I'd filled out a whole questionnaire and I'd shared a lot of what I did and didn't like. And here are some covers I like and here are others I really don't like. So it wasn't built off nothing from, my side. But I didn't have any control over it, and I was very happy when I saw it. So that's
beautiful. It's beautiful. It's evocative. Yeah. You get a sense that there's a woman involved, and you find out very quickly that she's Kate, our narrator.
Yeah.
But it's I thought it was very pretty. It's gorgeous blue. So late in the book, and I'm not giving anything away, we meet a character who shows up who says, what better way to explore history than through something personal?
Mm-hmm.
And it struck me that Restitution was doing just that. It's telling a very particular, tight family story that exemplifies and crystallizes the entirety of what the wall symbolized, how life was on both sides of the wall, and what issues would arise. So in a sense, all the people you met in Leipzig when you were living there, are there pieces that you pulled from different families and different stories you heard? Is there anyone who was sort of a role model for any of these characters, or?
No, I wouldn't say there's one person who's a role model for any of the characters. There's really bits and pieces. I mean, some of it just purely imagined, some of it from stories I heard from others. So a real mix. But I would say, it wasn't until after I had the contract for the book and we sort of started talking about marketing that it ever even occurred to me that this book would be considered historical fiction, which might sound crazy, but I really didn't think of it that way, because the book that to me, the thing that drives this book are the characters and the family. And I am fascinated by the history, but at least my goal was never to write a book that was driven by the history, but to write a book that was driven by the family story, because that's actually what fascinates me the most, are the family dynamics. And I loved using the family dynamics as a way to sort of illuminate the history, but definitely not the other way around.
Right. Well, I think the definition now, and it bothers me greatly, is that if it's 50 years old, or if there any part of the book that is 50 years or old or longer, it's historical fiction. It's like,
I know, and I'm fine. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Although I will say I struggle with sort of the somehow the clarity of those lines, because to me, I also think that what happened in the time period that's described here, 89, 90, 91 in Germany, continues to have an incredibly strong impact on politics today. And so to me, when I read a book, if it has real contemporary resonance and relevance, I sort of, even if it covers a historical time period, I think of it as contemporary. So I struggle with those lines. But I also, people, it's one of the lovely things about having a book out there in the world is that it's out of my hands and people can interpret it and define it however they want. I can't do anything about it. And there's actually something sort of liberating about that.
I would imagine. Was one time period easier or harder to write than the others? I mean, there's a lot of fluidity. So for readers and our viewers to know, it's not like we're jumping and now the entire book is set in a different time period. There's a lot of memory and conversations that sort of segue the reader back to a different time period. Did you like writing one part better than the other, or have more of a struggle with one part or another?
I wouldn't say I liked writing one. I liked writing all of it. I mean, one of the things about coming to writing after a long career doing something else and discovering how much I loved it is that I loved every moment of the writing. But the timeline in the 50s was the hardest in that it was the least familiar to me. So I definitely had to do the most research, and I was the most sort of, in a way, worried about getting it right. But I loved it. It wasn't that I didn't like writing it. It was just that it was the hardest. And the thing about jumping around was actually really important to me. In fact, there were earlier versions of the book that jumped around a lot more than it does now, because the thing I wanted to capture was, the whole thing is narrated by Kate, and she's trying to remember so that she can understand what went so wrong in her relationship with her brother. And the way we remember things is not remotely chronological. We jump around all over, sort of associating from one episode to another. And I was trying to capture that feeling in the book. And there was a version where I was jumping around so much that I think it just, it didn't hold together. But my hope was to find this middle ground where, I can guide the reader through it so you know where you are in time, but I'm still capturing that feeling of a person who is sort of struggling to understand something that happened and remembering, as they go along. That was really my goal.
We have this sense of how the past shapes us. And so even the sections that happen either early in the lives of Kate and Martin or in their grandfather's life and grandmother's life before their birth, where, those are influential, and we're seeing that play out as they go forward. Couple other things before we take questions. I did want to talk a little bit of just a few of the beautiful writing things that I'm seeing in the book, because it is a beautifully written book, and you learn so much about these individual characters. You have just a couple lines that I want to read just to give our viewers a sense. You talk about the sound of raindrops was a constant background, a percussion poem. I just love that sound, the percussion poem. It just hit, so beautifully. I'm going to read this comment from Robin Stahl. I just read a section in Helene Mario's Dark Rhapsody that shares the deeply had appreciation of receiving the Shabbat candlesticks from the grandparents she never knew. Yeah, that's it. You have this sense of history that is just right there from, its connection, whether it's the connection of family, whether it's the idea of family, or if there's some genetic, they talk about you inherit more than just DNA. There's some, they talk about people, there's a whole study of a friend who wrote a book, Elizabeth Rosner, who wrote a book called, what's it called? Oh, it's going to bother me. Survivor Cafe. And she talks about epigenetics and how there's studies of certain animals who associate fears of a certain poisoned food, that where the labs poisoned the flour, and then multiple generations, those same animals will avoid that flour, even though the flour they're seeing is not poisonous. So what do you carry? What is internalized either genetically or just emotionally, as those candlesticks are? And then the other question I saw that statement I like, there are a few others. No one answered the questions I didn't ask, which is just so, there's a profound aspect to that I loved. And before we go to questions, I just want to ask, you did a lot of your writing, you say, in cafes when you lived in Leipzig. Were you highly caffeinated? Is that still your how you write? Do you have a different writing routine now?
Sadly, I'm often highly caffeinated. I've started making half calf at home because it allows me to drink double the number of cups.
There's an idea.
Yeah,
I should try that.
Exactly. I write less frequently in cafes here. I think part of the reason I did it so much when I was in Leipzig was it was my first time writing. I was coming off jobs where I had colleagues and people around me all the time. And so it was an adjustment to sort of the more isolated life of writing. And for me, it was really important just to have that buzz of people around initially. And I guess I've become more accustomed to just writing alone, but I still do find places to write with others. I have one of the wonderful things about the last few years is just building this amazing writing community, both in DC, but elsewhere. And so I, definitely have people that we sit and write together, just so it's still quiet, but it's not quite as isolated.
Now you're taking an MFA, and I know you're working on some new pieces.
Yes.
What's the one piece of information, advice, or craft that you've learned from your MFA studies so far that has made it worthwhile?
Yeah, okay, that's really hard because I think
know
my MFA has been fabulous. It was a hard decision sort of at my stage in life. Does it still make sense? Does it not? I've loved everything about it. I'm in my final semester now, and I'm already sad. But I think the thing that I've learned most from it, because I've just worked with the most amazing faculty, and all the faculty come to my work with this notion that they're not trying to help. They're trying to help me improve it so that it can be the best version of what I want it to be, not to be any version of what they think it should be. And I think that attitude has done two things for me. One, I've become actually more open to input and feedback and critique, and anything anybody says. Even if my first reaction is that's ridiculous, I always take a deep breath and think, well, maybe it's not. And I sort of try to figure out what could be in it that makes sense. But so I've become more open, but I've also become more stubborn. Like, I also am very good at knowing what I'm absolutely not willing to budge on. And I actually think that confidence came from the work that I've done as part of the MFA.
That's great. So I understand we have some questions. Renee Herskowitz, who's a longtime fan of this show and of The Blaze, approximately how long did the research take you? How long did the writing take you?
It's really hard for me to separate those out because I am not the kind of person who does the research and then writes. I did both simultaneously at all times. So I started writing in 2017. I actually finished the first draft for me, relatively quickly, about a year and a half. I'm not a very fast writer, but then most of my writing happens in revision by far. So for me, the first draft is just discovery. It's also part of where I figure out what research I still need to do. Where are the gaps? And so yes, I was doing research in that first year and a half, but I actually did a lot after that as well. I mean, the revision took me a lot longer, but that was partially because I also moved back to the US, started working full time again. I didn't have the glorious full days in cafes anymore. So I signed my contract for publication in late 2023. So, 2017 to end of 2023, basically.
During the drafting and redrafting stages, did the characters change? Did the plot change? You mentioned that the time periods you jumped it around a little bit, or
the structure is what changed the most. The structure is definitely what changed the most. The characters probably changed the least, though they definitely became much more defined. They were sort of still vague in the first draft, and they became much more defined. The plot changed. In this case, with this book, I knew where I wanted it to start more or less, and I knew where I wanted it to end. So those things didn't change all that much, but the middle changed a lot.
Okay, interesting. Other questions? Do you feel that some families create histories of their grandparents and great-grandparents because that history is unknown? Sort of the idea of family lore and myth.
Probably, right? I mean, we all want some sort of family myth. So I would imagine that's probably quite common. And in the case of the family in my book, there was a lot they didn't know, and they had sort of filled those gaps with what they thought had happened. Turns out they were wrong.
Right. And so
they
had to
relearn. They had to relearn their family history. But yeah, I imagine so.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I really have enjoyed meeting you, Tamar. The book is Restitution from Regal House Publishing. It came out September 30th. It's a great weekend to go buy the book. You can go to bookshop.org. We have it on our Mighty Blaze shelf, and you can start reading it and commemorate the 36th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I wish you great luck as you continue your book tour and with book sales.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's been a real pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. Well, if you've enjoyed this show, please follow us on social media. We are everywhere. Please sign up for our newsletter. I will be back December 11th at 2 p.m. for a conversation with Kendra Coulter, who has written a book called The Tortoise Tale. And it's a delightful debut narrated by, as you guessed it, a tortoise. So look, very different kind of book than this one, but we're always here bringing you the best of debut books, fiction, nonfiction, and memoir. And I hope you will join us December 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Till then, keep reading.